Okay, so moving on to the second poem, and that is Snow Gum. And again, we have a very literal title for the poem, The Snow Gum, which leaves nothing to the imagination in terms of what it is about. The one thing I do want to express before we get started is it is about gum trees, but we do need to think about the idea of the grayer, more bluey toned gum trees as opposed to green, because we have to think about this poem being set in winter, and it is really about a gum tree that is covered in snow and ice, and it is about the way that the light is reflecting on the gum tree and how that is making a shimmering light on the snow, and we'll tell you a little bit more about it as we go through. So it is very detailed description, and it allows the reader to feel a sense that they are actually there viewing the gum tree. So again, similar to water lily, where it's assumed that you would feel like you are there at that moment being pointed to the water lily in the fish pond. Again, this poem's written in a way as if you were standing there looking at the gum tree yourself. So the overall effect is very delicate, it's very soft in terms of the description, but there's a balance between describing some fragile elements but then showing some strength within the tree itself. So we start off with obviously a literal and succinct title, nothing really else much to say. Overall, this poem is in 3 stanzas, each is 6 lines, and each have the same rhyming scheme of A, A, B, C, C, B. So, the poem is also set in the present tense, and we get that via the it is. So again, we're in that moment. And there is some religious imagery within the poem as well, but again, it really looks at these here. So it utilises personification, simile, assonance, and alliteration and sibilance in order to create some effect. Because again, we have to think of that distinctively visual, so it's not necessarily what is the poem about, it's how it's creating a more visual and realistic image. So we start off with the first stanza. It is the snow gum silently in the noon's blue and silvery flowering of light of snow, performing its slow miracle, where upon drift and icicle perfect lies its shadow. So in this stanza, we're really getting a sense of the beauty, that it's quite tranquil, it's quite peaceful, and a quite peaceful landscape. Within this stanza, what we can see is a use of sibilance throughout the stanza, and what that does is it helps to slow it down and really emphasize some of those elements. So what we have being described in this stanza is the snow gum, and in the noon's blue and silvery flowering light. So there is, the sun that's shining through on the snow-covered tree, and it's flickering the light. So the flowering of light is the way that the light is being cast along through the ground. What we also see is the shadow, and this is something that's probably the most distinctive in this poem, is that it's looking at how the gum itself is trying to replicate the perfect nature of its shadow. So it's presenting this idea that it is standing there, it's quite strong and proud, and we'll see that in the next stanza, but throughout it there is this flickering light, and we're having this comparison between the tree itself and the shadow cast because of the light. We move on then into the second stanza. So leaf upon leaf's fidelity, the creamy trunk's solidity, the full-grown curve of the crown, it is the tree's perfection, now shown in clear reflection like flakes of snow-grey stone. So what we have here is this idea of the leaf and the leaf's fidelity. So this idea that even though it is winter, the leaves are still hanging around, but they are covered in snow and they are reflecting its light. Okay, and the creamy trunk is really just a straight description of the colour of the gum tree. Okay, and What we then have is a reference in the third line of the full grown, and so that means that it is the a full grown gum. It's not small, it is quite large, and if you've ever stood under a really tall gum tree, you'll understand how powerful it can be. And it goes on to continue that sense of the power of it through the curve of the crown. So that's talking about the top of the tree and having this curve, almost like this crown sitting upon the trunk itself. And that is, can be taken literally and also metaphoric. So there's literally in terms of the shape and how it appears in that way, but also then linking somewhat to that sense of almost perfection as well. So we've got, perfection up here in terms of the shadow, and then we move down and we've got the crown, which again is something that we tend to assume with perfection and high status and things like that. What we also have to then look at in this stanza is that idea of the fidelity. So again, it's using personification to talk about how this tree is possessing some of those qualities. We then move down to the first of the similes, so now shown in clear reflection like flakes of soft grey stone, and that is talking about the shadows. So this is where we start to see this. There's a bit of a not a competition, but a comparison in the way that the tree is represented and then the shadows. So it's a very clear reflection like flakes of soft grey stone. So that's where we start to see the surrounding landscape. And there is a sense that this is set obviously somewhere near the snowy mountains or that type of landscape, somewhere where there is snow, because obviously it's covering everything. We do have a bit of an oxymoron there in that line with the soft and stone, in that sense that we tend to think of stone as something very hard and harsh, but because of the nature of the snow, it's adding to that softness. And if we move on now into the third stanza, so out of the granite's eternity, out of the winter's long enmity, something is done on the snow, and the silver light, like ecstasy, flows where the green tree perfectly curves to its perfect shadow. So we have a very distinct repetition there of perfect throughout the whole poem. But there's repetition there. So out of the granite's eternity, so coming out of the ground in that hard climate, because it is a rocky landscape as well. Out of the winter's long enmity. So again, what that is it's talking about how out of the snow there is this tree, and it's quite, a very large and commanding tree. Something is done in the snow. So out of that ground, out of the tree, because of the light, at noon, in midday, we can see this ecstasy. So this really amazing, beautiful reflection flickering through the tree. And that's part reflection of the light and the shadows, part is due to the reflection on the snow. And the silver light like ecstasy. So again, that's talking about the greys cast as a shadow and the colour of the gum and the snow. So flows with a green tree perfectly, curves to its perfect shadow. And what we have here is again that sense of the shadow and the tree. So the tree is trying to emulate this perfection that this shadow is. Okay, so this perfect shadow. And the tree is trying to emulate that. And that very much contradicts our concept and our logic in that we know that the shadow is formed from the tree. But he's making the tree come alive and giving it a bit more of the personification and creating a bit of difference and distinctive quality by making it as if the tree is moving, not because of the light, but moving because it wants to emulate the shadow and this perfect thing that has been created. Okay, and so we get this overall, within the whole poem, we get this overall metaphor that the tree is seeking perfection. So all of these things are about the tree and its search to find perfection and some ideal quality within this harsh environment. And that very much is relating to religion and idealistic qualities. And again, it is capturing a moment in time. So nothing else is moving except for the light, which is causing this to happen. Okay, and obviously that grey tone and the grey shadow is helping it blend and sit within the landscape. So hopefully that's given you an overview in terms of the techniques and what the poem is about, and we will look at it further in class.